Right, hello there. Sorry, I've not. I've been a bit off on the uploading of these. I'm afraid the internet's been a bit crappy, so I've not been able to get them up quite so frequently as I'd hoped. I shall leave this one going overnight. Now, what I've done here is I've compressed the last sort of 0.5 of a day in Washington, the train journey between Washington and Chicago, and all of Chicago into one video for reasons that I shall explain in a minute. So yes, my last 0.5 of a day in Washington, by which I mean the last sort of half day really before I had to get to the train in Chicago, I visited the Washington Postal Museum. Now I'm afraid these shots are all very poor. Actually, I'm not really sure why, but a lot of them are very poor. But I trust you'll forgive me for that, and try and enjoy them in the spirit in which they're intended. No, but the Washington Postal Museum, very interesting, though it doesn't sound it. A lot of focus on stamp collecting as well, I have to say, a bit of philately. But no, it was interesting enough in its own right. And I mean, the post office building itself, the place where the museum is sited, is actually in the old post office. And my goodness, it is grand. They do like overdoing things, particularly in Washington. Yes, so a very interesting little visit anyway. They had. I'm glad they had another diorama. They had a sort of walk through diorama. You turned a corner and all of a sudden you were in Middle Earth. And then there was the big hall that had a lot of sort of vehicles, old postal delivery vehicles, including a couple of planes and a couple of vans. So yes, so that was Washington last day, really, that last little bit. So, concluding remarks on Washington for me. Washington's odd. Washington's very odd. Washington doesn't feel like a real city. You know those villages that they have in China, and it's mostly in China. They have those villages that are sort of facsimiles of Venice. It's a mock-up of Venice. That's what Washington feels like. It feels like a mock-up of a capital city, and everyone there feels like they feel like they're acting. They're just acting a part. It's a very, very odd city, I have to say. But I think partially what it is that it's because it's so sort of artificial. I think that doesn't help, certainly from a European perspective, because it's so artificial. It's like they built all these grand buildings that are sort of reminiscent of your sort of Renaissance architecture. They built all these grand buildings, and then at the end of the time they finished building them all, they sort of stood back and said, "No, I suppose we need to fill these with something now, don't we?" And it just feels a bit fake, a bit artificial, a bit too artificial, I think, a bit too designed, in a way that I've never really encountered before, even in sort of planned towns back home. So yeah, completely a very interesting place. Don't get me wrong, it's got some very good museums, and it's nice to see all the places you see on TV. The Capitol building and the White House. Just so you know they're real and they're not just sort of drawing a picture of the White House onto a lawn. It is a real place. I have been there now, so I feel that I do know that in fact this government does exist, despite the fact that sometimes it looks like they don't. So that was my concluding remarks on Washington. So then I had to get the train to Chicago. Now the train to Chicago was a 23-hour train, so it was a very long train. I got on at Washington Grand Union Station, and I learnt a few things, I have to say, on the journey between them. I actually have a list of them here, which I shall dig out my thing. Right, yeah. So things I learned on the train to Chicago. Firstly, they're very big on detraining. Every time it stops, it's if you want to detrain, then move towards the center of the carriage. I don't know what it is about detraining, but they're a big fan of it. It doesn't sound like a real word. It is a real word, but it doesn't sound like one. And I mean, the journey from Washington to Chicago is a bit sort of roundabout, really, and you go south first through Virginia. Now, one of the things I learned about Virginia is that it goes on forever. It almost literally doesn't stop, Virginia. It just keeps going. You could ask, hours apart, where were we? And my God, we're still in Virginia. and it's mostly sort of forested hills, which are very pleasant to look at, and old rusty railway carriages. Some of which were quite interesting because they were quite interesting carriages in their own right. Others of which were just eyesores, basically. So then, as soon as you've gone through Virginia, you move into West Virginia. So we're going on a bit more to West Virginia, and now half the places in West Virginia, I've come to the conclusion, aren't real places because they will have funny names. So we encountered White Sulphur Springs, which just sounds so typical that it really doesn't sound real. And there was also Prince Wiss, Virginia. Now I'm not sure who Prince Wiss was. I may actually be getting that wrong. I don't know. I haven't double checked my facts here. So if there on any off chance happens to be anyone watching from the small town that may be called Prince Wiss in West Virginia, please feel free to get in touch with me. Now, this being an American train, of course, we had delays. We had a lot of delays. In fact, the cumulative effect of these delays was that instead of taking 23 hours, the journey took 27, and not a single of which I slept in, which was annoying. But one of the reasons they gave for one of the early delays, because we had several, was that a rock had jumped out in front of the train. So evidently in West Virginia and Virginia there were very motive rocks that like throwing themselves before the wheels of carriages. As excuses go, it is quite poor. It's worthy of any of the British rail companies, I think. But that was their excuse, was that a rock had jumped out in front and they had to check there was no damage. Okay, what else did I learn? In Indiana, you go through, eventually you get into Indiana, which is sort of, you're on your way to Chicago then. Yeah, so you go into there, and then, yeah, and some of the houses there have moustaches, which is a bit of a bizarre sight, but they do seem to have moustaches. They seem to be quite keen on moustaches. So yeah, so some of the houses there have moustaches, and that's great if you happen to like having a moustache on your house. If you don't like having to shave your house regularly, then I imagine it's not such a cracking thing. Now, another thing about the delays that cropped up and that was prominent was that at every delay we were told sort of 15 minutes, well no, an hour in, after about an hour of the delay, you were told, okay, we're going to be moving now. And they weren't lying, you did move. The fact that it was only about 15 yards before you stopped again was irrelevant. Or apparently it seemed to be irrelevant to the train company, at any rate, Amtrak. But a name drop there, it's Amtrak. Be careful of Amtrak. Although, to be honest, the other train company, I think it's just the American Railroads, full stop. Yeah, and the final thing that I sort of learned, and I put on my list of things I learned, is that horn tooting is just as rife on the rails as it is on the roads. They're constantly beeping their blooming horns. I don't know what it is, but they're obsessed with it. So yeah, so that was the journey. Eventually, we did pull into Chicago Union Station, not to be confused with Washington Grand Union. Another very grand building. They're good at grand stations, I have to say. And then I got a cab out to where I'm staying. I'm not actually staying in Chicago. I'm staying in a little village called Franklin Park, which is about half an hour away. So I actually, on the first day, I got a cab because after 27 hours with no sleep, I wanted to just get into bed. I didn't want to have to fiddle about trying to work out which train I needed to get. So that brought me into Chicago. Now, I haven't got many pictures from Chicago, and a lot of them are very similar. And the reason for this is because I accidentally, but rather serendipitously, rolled into Chicago for the duration of, essentially, the Chicago Blues Festival. Now, I'm a big fan of the blues, and I genuinely didn't know this was happening until I walked down to the front, Lake Michigan's front, and saw a sort of festival on. I thought, okay, there seems to be some sort of festival gig on here. And I had a look at one of the leaflets, and lo and behold, it was the Blues Festival. So the reason I haven't got many pictures of Chicago is because I don't really see many of the sights. I spent most of my time sitting around listening to some rather fantastic music being played by some rather fantastic people. Now, there was actually another festival on. I think it was called, and any of the old Veds members will like this, it was called the Spring Awakening Festival. And basically what I could discern was it involved a lot of young people sort of covering themselves in rhinestones and then going to dance to some sort of aggressive music. Now, to be honest, some of them hadn't been too careful with the rhinestones, and it basically looked like they'd fallen headfirst into an Argos jewellery counter. It wasn't very impressive what some of them had done. Some of them had done some quite clever designs. I have to give them that. I mustn't disparage them too much. But what this did mean was that there were a lot of very sort of friendly, very attentive folks walking around. But no, I didn't go to that one because that was a paid festival and I'm cheap. So I didn't go to that one. The Blues Festival was free, so I could sit around all day on the various stages. Well, not on the stages, I wasn't playing, but at the various stages, listening to them jamming away. Now, yeah, as I said, there were some fantastic artists there, really fantastic. Of course, Chicago being the home of the blues, they're sort of ideally placed to exploit that. And you can see why, because a lot of the artists are sort of local artists. There are a lot of international artists, but they all seem to start locally. Obviously, the Chicago blues being a big thing on the blues scene. And so Chicago Blues Festival, great few days. I can guarantee if you come in June, try and coincide with that. I met some good people, as I'm having a bit of chat with some people. There were four of them, sorry, who I was chatting with last night when I was listening on the main stage, and they had Willie Clayton, the artist, on, and we had got good chatting. We were having a bit of a dance. I was sort of reflecting on the blues as a form, and I think to me blues is the only. Blues goes straight to the soul. I'm not a very spiritual person, but blues is the only music for me that goes straight to the soul without going through any other filtering mechanism. And quite frankly, some of the pieces that are being played today, if you weren't tapping your foot along to them, I think you were probably dead, because they were just fantastic, and they got even. I was up there dancing away because they were really fantastic. But lots of people having lots of fun is the point. Now, Chicago itself, then, I'm going to do my sort of review of Chicago. You get two reviews here as well, because I'm moving on from Chicago tomorrow morning, flying off to Las Vegas. But no, Chicago itself is probably the most beautiful city I've ever been in. Certainly the one I've enjoyed the most, because it has its own thing going on. Chicago, all of the cities seem to feel they're fraught. There's always people rushing around. There's always a feeling that something's going to happen soon, and it's going to be good for some people and bad for others. And everyone's rushing around, and you kind of get this feeling that everyone's worried that it might be bad for them or it might be good for them. And there's a sort of constant sense of worry. Chicago doesn't have that. Chicago is just it gives you a feeling, Chicago, that everything's going to be all right, that you don't have to do anything. It's just, everything's going to be cool, man. It's fine. We're going to work with this, and this is all going to be cool, no matter what happens. And that is a great feeling. And it's the only city in the world that I've encountered that has that feeling. If there are any mayors listening and they feel the need to put their own city into my purview, then feel free. As long as you're paying for my tickets, I will come and visit you, and I will see if you match up to Chicago. But it's a fantastic city as well. It's a very beautiful city. So you've got these sort of spires in the loop at one end, and the spires at the other end, the sort of glittering, glass spirals. Now, one of them has been quietly ruined. Anyone who's been keeping up with the news will notice that the Chicago City Council is complaining about the Trump Tower, which Donald Trump, the bewigged maniac, looks like he's put a big sign of his name on it. It says Trump in big letters. And the city of Chicago are very pleased with this because they say it spoiled the building. I am inclined to agree with them on that one, I have to say. It is just an exhibit to vanity, it really is. He's a ridiculous man, he really is. So, but in between the two sort of islands of spires, you have this sort of low-rise bit. You have the rail tracks, the sort of metro local rail tracks. They run over the streets in a lot of places. So you've got this constant rattle. And the other thing is that you can't walk sort of more than 200 yards in Chicago without having music in your ears. It really is. It really is. It's the only city I've been to that I would describe as a city of music and song. You can't go 200 yards on the street without somebody sitting there with a drum kit or somebody sitting there with a guitar or harmonica playing this music, and this music, and it sets the beat for the city. It really does. So that noise is me clicking, by the way. Sorry, I'm getting quite worked up in this, but it sets the tone for the city, and Chicago really does feel like it swings to its own beat, and it doesn't really care what anyone else thinks. And then down on the front, you've got this beautiful lake. Obviously, it's on the shores of Lake Michigan now. Those in the know will know that Lake Michigan is the biggest lake in the world. Those hydrographers amongst you will also no doubt say, well, actually, technically, Lake Michigan Huron, which is the entire body of water, is, but and I acknowledge that, but for the purposes of this, I'm going to consider Lake Michigan to be the biggest in the world, and it is big. It is big. I will confirm that it is big. It's not a lie that it's big, but you go down there, and it's just this beautiful stretch of azure blue water. It's got sailing ships on it. It's got yachts. It really does feel, and particularly given that it's been quite warm at the moment, it feels like being on the Riviera. It really does. It's beautiful. You know it's fresh water, but it is beautiful. So yeah, you got this massive expanse of land. It's gorgeous. Of water rather, not land. You can't see the land from the lake shore. Well, you can, but only because you're standing on it. So yeah, so Chicago is just I can't wait. I physically can't wait for my next time to come here. I really can't, because it really is a absolutely fantastic place. If you ever get the chance to visit any city in America, I would say visit Chicago. So far, I may change my mind over the next few days, but for the moment, Chicago is my one top tip. So yes. Saying it's been hot in Chicago, it's actually been a little cooler. I feel obliged as a Brit to mention the weather. It's been a little cooler in Chicago than it was in Washington, D.C., which in one way is a blessing because it gives you a bit of respite, but in another way, given that I'm going to the middle of the Mojave Desert next, is probably not a good thing. I checked the weather in Vegas and it's hitting 36, 37 degrees, so that's going to be a bit of a shock to the system, I think. So tomorrow morning, my flight's at 2, but I need to be at the airport by sort of 11. I fly over to Las Vegas, where I am linking up with a friend of mine from back home who's joining me for the last bits. And yes, so that's looking fun. I shall try and report back. I'm not sure exactly how often I'll be able to do these, but I shall make sure I do record all of them, and they will all go up eventually. So for now, I hope you've enjoyed the limited amount of pictures I have. I won't put them on on loop. I'll just extend the duration of the pictures to cover the whole of the video, which is now standing at nearly 20 minutes. So I better shut up soon. So top tips for the day then. Don't travel Amtrak or American Rail because you will be delayed. I say that I have got another Amtrak trip between LA and San Francisco later, but I shall ignore that for the time being. Visit Chicago. If you can get here at the same time as the Blues Festival, do, because you will hear some of the most exquisite and sublime musical forms that you will ever hear. And yes, my top tip now for myself is to quiet a night and go to bed because I need to get some sleep. So, I hope you enjoyed. I shall report back from probably Vegas or LA, and we shall see how things go. So, ciao for now.